The nation had tuned in for what was supposed to be another high-profile charity broadcast. Celebrities, politicians, speeches, a call for unity. But nobody expected what Denzel Washington was about to unleash. Sitting under the harsh glow of studio lights, the Oscar-winning actor's expression carried a quiet fire. He adjusted his suit jacket, leaned forward, and locked eyes with the moderator. His tone was measured, but his words hit like thunder. Donald Trump isn't a leader. He's a weak man who bullies to hide his fear. No kings in this country. Not now, not ever. The audience froze. A split second later, gasps filled the air. Then the crowd erupted, some cheering, others shouting. Within minutes, clips flooded X, TikTok, and YouTube. Hashtag Denzel versus Trump trended globally in less than an hour. Major outlets broke their schedules to replay the moment in slow motion, analyzing every blink, every pause. Inside the White House media room, Trump's team stared at the monitors in disbelief. Did he just call him weak? On live TV, one aide muttered. Another whispered, "This is going to explode." Trump himself was at Mar-a-Lago, watching the replay in silence. His jaw tightened, the familiar flash of fury igniting behind his eyes. He didn't call his advisors. He didn't need a statement drafted. He already knew what he would do. "He thinks he's tough?" Trump said finally, his voice low but venomous. "Let's see how tough he is when I talk." That single sentence would soon turn a late-night soundbite into a full-blown political earthquake. And America hadn't even seen the first aftershock. By dawn, America was already split in two. Coffee shops, offices, and newsrooms buzzed with one headline. Denzel Washington calls Trump weak and a bully. Overnight, what began as a celebrity remark had turned into a political inferno. Networks played the clip on loop. Analysts dissected his tone, his pauses, the smirk at the end, and the tension behind every syllable. This wasn't Hollywood gossip anymore. This was a direct challenge to Trump's public image, a man whose brand thrived on dominance. At precisely 8:45 a.m., the silence broke. Trump's Truth social feed erupted with capital letters and fury. Denzel Washington is a third-rate actor with an overrated ego. He should stick to movies, not politics. Within minutes, his post had millions of shares. Supporters flooded the comments with chants of loyalty. Trump 2024. Hollywood is toast. While critics mocked the meltdown, the clash spread like wildfire. CNN called it the most explosive cultural confrontation of the year. Behind the scenes, campaign strategists saw opportunity. Trump's advisors urged him to weaponize the moment, to turn Denzel's criticism into a rallying cry. "They think you're weak," one aide whispered. "Prove them wrong. Hit harder." Trump smiled, the kind of grin that came before a storm. Meanwhile, Denzel sat in his Los Angeles home, scrolling through the chaos. Friends told him to step back. Publicists begged him to issue a soft statement. But he didn't flinch. His jaw set, eyes cold. He muttered, "They want a headline? I'll give them history." By nightfall, major outlets were teasing his response. Denzel Washington live, one nation watching. The stage was set. Cameras ready. Millions waiting. The next day, America would either witness a man's fall or the rebirth of a voice that refused to be silenced. The night of the broadcast felt electric, the kind of tension that precedes a historic speech or a national tragedy. Every network was tuned in. Social media feeds were refreshing by the second. The lower thirds on TV read, "Live, Denzel Washington responds to Trump." The studio lights reflected off his face as he took a slow breath. Behind him, the No Kings banner hung like a silent declaration of defiance. The moderator barely got a question out before Denzel leaned forward, voice calm but heavy with conviction. "You call me irrelevant? You call me fake? Let me tell you something. Leadership isn't built on insults or gold-plated towers. It's built on truth, on empathy, on courage when cameras aren't rolling." The crowd gasped, then applauded. His tone wasn't loud, but it cut deeper than shouting ever could. Viewers could feel it. This wasn't acting. This was a man shedding Hollywood polish for raw authenticity, the kind that burns straight through the screen. In living rooms across America, people stopped scrolling. Factory workers, soldiers, teachers, everyone listened. Some nodded in silent agreement. Others clenched their fists in anger. The country was divided, but united in one thing. They couldn't look away. Meanwhile, at Mar-a-Lago, Trump was pacing like a lion in a cage. His aides tried to mute the television, but he waved them off. "Let it play," he snapped. His face was stone, but his eyes blazed. When Denzel said, "No one is above the people," Trump slammed the arm of his chair. Within minutes of the broadcast ending, hashtags exploded. Hashtag Denzel strikes back. Hashtag no kinks. Hashtag Trump meltdown. Analysts called it a masterclass in composure, while conservative commentators raged about Hollywood arrogance. But the biggest shock wasn't what Denzel said. It was what came next. Rumors began to swirl that powerful political donors, inspired by his words, had reached out privately. They wanted him to speak again, not as an actor, not as an activist, but as something far more dangerous, a potential candidate. Within hours of Denzel's live broadcast, the political world erupted like a shaken soda can. The video racked up 50 million views in less than a day, and clips of his fiery words filled every social feed. No kings, once a small cultural slogan, had now become a full-blown national movement. Trump's response was inevitable and brutal. That same evening, he appeared at a rally in Ohio, red tie blazing under the floodlights, his crowd roaring. The teleprompter waited silently, but Trump didn't need it. His voice boomed across the arena. Denzel Washington, a Hollywood hypocrite. He talks about truth while living in mansions built from fake virtue. The crowd erupted in cheers. Trump pounded the podium and continued, spinning the moment into a political weapon. "They hate your freedom. They mock your voice. But I'll tell you this, we are the people, and no spoiled celebrity will ever silence us." Cable news cut between the rally and analysts in disbelief. MSNBC called it a calculated escalation. Fox News declared, "Trump defends the people against elitist attacks." But on Twitter, a different story was unfolding. Clips from Denzel's speech were being stitched with messages of unity, justice, and resistance. Teachers, veterans, single parents, ordinary Americans began sharing his words with hashtags like hashtag No Kings Movement and hashtag Stand With Denzel. Behind the scenes, White House insiders whispered that Trump's campaign was rattled. Pollsters noticed a sharp spike in public sympathy for Denzel, especially among younger voters. One strategist warned, "If he keeps talking like this, he's not just an actor anymore. He's a symbol." Meanwhile, Denzel's team debated their next move. Some feared Trump's army of online trolls. Others saw the perfect storm forming. Denzel, calm but resolute, simply said, "He thinks I'm playing a part. He doesn't realize this is the real me." The stage was no longer about entertainment or politics. It was about legacy. Two titans of American culture locked in a moral war that neither could afford to lose. By morning, the nation was on fire. Every newspaper headline screamed variations of the same words. Denzel versus Trump. America divided. Cable anchors barely slept, analysts sparred live on air, and social media pulsed with fury. One side painted Denzel as a hero who had finally said what millions were afraid to say. The other side branded him a traitor, another Hollywood elitist trying to lecture the working class. At the heart of it all stood a single phrase that refused to fade: "No kings." It wasn't just a slogan anymore. It was rebellion. Protesters held signs outside city halls. Graffiti artists sprayed it across walls from Los Angeles to New York. Hashtags turned into rallies, and rallies turned into movements. Young people were quoting Denzel's speech like scripture. In Washington, Republican senators demanded an apology from Denzel, calling his comments a dangerous incitement. Meanwhile, Democratic leaders tried to stay neutral, terrified of alienating either side. "This isn't about parties," one commentator said on CNN. "It's about power and who has the right to challenge it." Trump, for his part, refused to back down. At dawn, he took to Truth Social again, his words blazing across millions of screens. "Denzel Washington is done. Weak men pretend to be strong." Real strength doesn't need speeches. It wins elections. But if Trump thought his post would silence the uproar, he was wrong. Instead, it poured gasoline on the fire. Denzel's supporters clipped his statement, turning it into memes, songs, and viral TikToks. Even teenagers who couldn't vote were suddenly quoting political lines. The entertainment industry scrambled to respond. Late-night hosts couldn't resist. News podcasts devoted entire episodes to dissecting the feud. It was no longer about who was right. It was about who controlled the narrative. And in the middle of that chaos, Denzel's old friend, producer Malcolm Reed, made a call that would change everything. "You can't let him define you," he said. "You spoke truth to power once. Now you lead it." That single call planted a seed. For the first time, Denzel considered the unthinkable. What if this wasn't just a fight? What if it was the beginning of a movement, one that could actually take him all the way to Washington? The next 72 hours turned Denzel Washington's life into a living storm. Paparazzi swarmed his driveway. Journalists camped outside his home, shouting questions that echoed through the Los Angeles hills. "Are you running for office? Do you stand by your remarks? Is this personal?" Inside, his phone never stopped buzzing. Agents, studio heads, civil rights leaders, everyone wanted a statement. Some begged him to apologize and let it die quietly. Others whispered the opposite. "You've already said what millions feel. Don't stop now." In a quiet corner of his study, Denzel replayed his live broadcast on mute. He watched his own eyes, the anger, the control, the clarity. There was no regret, but he also saw the cost. His film projects were on hold. Sponsors were reviewing their relationships. Hollywood, once his home, suddenly felt like a stranger's house. At the same time, messages poured in from unexpected places: military veterans, single mothers, small business owners, people who said his words had inspired them. One letter stood out. It came from a steel worker in Pennsylvania. "You said what we've been screaming into the void for years. No kings, no bullies, just people." He read it 3 times. Something shifted. This wasn't about Trump anymore. It was about America, tired, divided, desperate for something real. Then came the call that tipped the balance. A retired senator from Georgia reached out privately. "Denzel, whether you like it or not, you've become the voice of millions," she said. "And when the people find a voice, they don't let it go silent." He stared out the window at the Los Angeles skyline, lights flickering like tiny stars. Somewhere out there, Trump was already planning his next move, turning rage into strategy. Denzel knew that if he stayed silent, he'd be painted as just another loud actor chasing attention. But if he spoke again, if he really spoke, the ground beneath American politics might never be the same. He took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and whispered to himself, "No kings, no crowns, just truth." That night, he called his publicist. "Set it up," he said. "Tomorrow, I speak again, not as an actor, as a man who's done waiting." The following night, America held its breath. Every network cleared its primetime slot. The stage was minimalist, just a podium, a black backdrop, and a single phrase projected behind Denzel in bold white letters: "No kings." There was no teleprompter, no rehearsed notes. Only silence and the hum of 1,000 cameras waiting to capture history in real time. Denzel stepped up to the microphone, his presence steady but alive with restrained fire. He looked straight into the lens, not an audience, but at a nation. This isn't about Trump. This isn't about Hollywood. This is about power, who holds it, who abuses it, and who's finally brave enough to take it back. The crowd erupted, but he raised a hand for quiet. "I've seen this country tear itself apart," he continued. "And I've seen leaders act like kings while the people pay the price. I'm not running from this fight. I'm standing in it." The words rippled through living rooms, bars, and phone screens across the nation. Some wept. Others scoffed. But no one turned away. Then, before the applause could settle, breaking news alerts flashed across every network. Trump was live, unscheduled, unfiltered, and furious. His rally in Florida had just begun, and the former president was pacing on stage, microphone in hand, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Denzel Washington thinks he's some kind of hero, Trump sneered. He says no kings? Well, guess what? Without kings, there's chaos. Without strength, there's weakness. He doesn't understand what it takes to lead. He's an actor pretending to play a president. The audience roared with laughter, chanting his name, drowning the air in red caps and flashing lights. Cable channels went into full meltdown mode. Split screens, dueling soundbites, ticker-tape chaos. CNN called it the most explosive night in live television history. Fox News labeled it Trump versus Hollywood, round 2. But while pundits argued and ratings soared, something deeper was happening. Polls began to shift. For the first time in years, Trump's approval dipped. Denzel's message, simple, raw, defiant, was echoing beyond ideology. He hadn't declared a campaign. He hadn't promised power. But America was listening as if he already had. And somewhere in that noise, a question began to spread like wildfire. If not Trump, then Denzel. Overnight, Denzel's second speech transformed into something far bigger than a celebrity statement. It became a political earthquake. The words "No Kings" were everywhere, spray-painted on city walls, printed on T-shirts, and trending nonstop across every social platform. Universities held debates about it. Churches quoted it from pulpits. The message had transcended the man. Major outlets scrambled to cover what they now called the Washington wave. Pollsters released shocking numbers. 41% of independents said they would support Denzel if he ever ran for office. Talk show hosts joked about it, but the laughter had an edge. Everyone could sense the shift. Something old was cracking. Something new was forming. Inside the White House, Trump's advisors were panicking. Leaked memos described an urgent need to contain the Denzel effect. His campaign team launched counter-ads, mocking Denzel as another Hollywood elitist pretending to be a patriot. But the strategy backfired spectacularly. Instead of hurting him, the attacks made him look fearless, a man standing tall against the political machine. Meanwhile, Denzel's small team of friends, activists, producers, and veterans started meeting in secret. They called themselves the Foundation. At first, it was about protecting him from media backlash. Then the discussion shifted. They began drafting policy ideas, grassroots outreach, and funding strategies. The question was no longer if Denzel would enter politics. It was when Trump, visibly agitated, began holding more rallies, ranting longer, sharper, louder. Every mention of Denzel drew cheers from his loyalists, but also nervous laughter. Polls showed a strange trend. Each attack from Trump boosted Denzel's favorability among undecided voters. "He's playing right into his hands," one strategist warned. Behind closed doors, Denzel remained quiet. No press conferences, no statements, just silence, the kind that feels like a gathering storm. But one morning, an aide leaked a single photo. Denzel walking into a private meeting with several former military generals and economists in Washington, D.C. The caption read simply, "Preparing for something bigger." The internet went insane. Commentators asked the same question again and again. Is Denzel Washington building a campaign? The morning of September 14th began like any other, but within an hour, the world changed. Major outlets interrupted their programming with the same red banner alert. Denzel Washington to make a major political announcement. The broadcast wasn't planned through Hollywood PR channels or a studio network. It was streamed directly from the steps of the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, raw, unfiltered, and open to the public. Within minutes, the crowd swelled into the tens of thousands. People held signs reading "No Kings, no bullies, no lies." Helicopters buzzed overhead. Reporters were shoulder to shoulder, whispering one word, historic. Across the country, Trump was on his private jet, watching in silence. His jaw tightened as Denzel walked to the podium, wearing a dark suit and no tie, his expression calm but burning with conviction. "I didn't plan for this," Denzel began, his voice low and steady. "I didn't wake up one day and decide to challenge a president. I spoke as a citizen." But when truth meets arrogance, when the powerful forget who they serve, silence becomes betrayal. The audience erupted. Applause echoed against the marble walls of the monument. Cameras caught faces streaming with tears, strangers holding hands. The speech felt less like politics and more like a collective awakening. Then he dropped the words that would dominate headlines for months. "I'm not running from this fight anymore. I'm running for the people." Gasps filled the air. Reporters stumbled over each other to confirm it. Denzel Washington, the Oscar-winning actor, the moral voice of a generation, had just announced his candidacy for president of the United States. Trump's team went into immediate overdrive. Within 30 minutes, the former president's spokesperson released a statement calling Denzel a delusional movie star with a savior complex. But the mockery rang hollow. Denzel's speech had already been viewed over 200 million times by the end of the day, the largest audience for any political announcement in American history. Cable news descended into chaos. Analysts screamed over each other. Social feeds split in half. Memes, debates, conspiracy theories, it was everywhere. And in the center of it all, Denzel stood before the monument, wind in his face, as if daring history itself to move aside. "No kings," he said softly as cameras zoomed in. "Just people." The crowd roared. That night, even Trump, in the privacy of his study, turned off the TV and muttered under his breath, "Now it's war." Within 48 hours of Denzel's announcement, the United States became a nation vibrating with anticipation and fear. Every headline screamed, "Washington versus Trump, the battle for America's soul." Cable networks suspended normal programming. Social platforms crashed under the flood of live reactions. Hashtags like hashtag #NoKings2028 and hashtag #TrumpStrikeBack competed for dominance. It wasn't just an election anymore. It was a cultural collision. Truth versus ego, discipline versus chaos, legacy versus change. At rallies across the country, crowds of thousands gathered, holding up phones to stream Denzel's speeches. His words had become rhythm, mantra, rebellion. "No kings" was chanted like gospel. He spoke about integrity, unity, and the American dream, not as a politician, but as a man who had lived both its privilege and its pain. Meanwhile, Trump fired back with the full weight of his empire. Attack ads blanketed the airwaves. He's an actor, not a leader. In press conferences, he mocked Denzel's Hollywood past, calling him the weakest man to ever think he could win. But behind closed doors, panic rippled through his campaign. Advisors whispered that Denzel's support was spreading beyond party lines. Military veterans, suburban parents, even former Trump voters were switching sides. The debates became theater, two men who embodied America's past and future colliding under white-hot lights. Trump sneered. Denzel stood unshaken. When asked about the insult, "Old, white, Nepo baby," Denzel smiled and said, "That wasn't an insult. It was a diagnosis." The audience gasped. The moderators froze. And in that instant, history tilted. By election week, streets were filled with energy unseen since the civil rights era. Art, music, and speeches echoed the same phrase, "No kings." Denzel's campaign was no longer his. It belonged to the people. As results rolled in, the numbers were razor thin. Midnight came. Reporters whispered. The final map glowed red, blue, and then purple. Denzel Washington had done the unthinkable. The next morning, he stood before the White House gates, cameras flashing, crowds chanting his name. He placed his hand on the podium, looked at the crumbling pillars of old politics behind him, and said, "This house was never meant to belong to kings, only to those who serve the people." The cheers shook the air. America had turned a page. The storm was over. Or perhaps just beginning. In a world of power and pride, truth still finds its voice. No kings, just people. Thanks for watching.